I never thought I'd live to see the day when my own son would raise his hand against me. The sound of that slap still echoes in my mind, 3 weeks later, like a church bell that won't stop ringing. But what hurts more than the sting on my cheek is the look in his eyes. The same eyes I once kissed goodnight every evening. The same eyes that used to light up when I walked into his room after a nightmare. My name is Laura, and I'm 67 years old. I've buried 2 husbands, raised 3 children mostly on my own, and survived more heartbreak than most people could imagine. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the moment my son looked at me like I was a stranger who had no right to exist in his world. It started 3 months ago, when I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. My daughter-in-law Emma was 5 months pregnant with their first child, glowing with that special radiance expectant mothers have, completely unaware that her husband was already planning to repeat the same pattern that destroyed my first marriage 35 years ago. I was visiting their house on a Saturday morning, bringing homemade soup because Emma had been struggling with morning sickness. I let myself in with the spare key they'd given me, something that now feels like a lifetime ago, when I was still welcome in their home. Michael was in his office, door slightly ajar, speaking on the phone in hushed tones that immediately caught my attention. "She doesn't need to know," he was saying, his voice carrying that particular tone men use when they think they're being clever. "Emma's emotional enough with the pregnancy. This is just temporary anyway. Once the baby comes, everything will settle down." I stood frozen in their hallway, my hands trembling around the soup container, as I heard my son discussing his affair with someone on the other end of that call. The woman's name was Jessica. She worked at his office. They'd been seeing each other for 4 months, longer than Emma had even known she was pregnant. The conversations that followed over the next several weeks painted a picture I recognized all too well. Secret lunch meetings, weekend business trips that coincided perfectly with Emma's visits to her mother, hotel receipts hidden in his car, the same careful choreography of deception that my first husband had performed with surgical precision until the day I found him in our bed with my sister. I watched Emma planning the nursery with such joy, picking out tiny clothes and reading pregnancy books late into the night, completely trusting in the man who was systematically betraying her. She reminded me so much of myself at that age. Hopeful, devoted, believing that love could conquer anything if you just tried hard enough. For 2 months, I said nothing. I told myself it wasn't my place, that maybe I was wrong, that perhaps there was some explanation I couldn't see. But every Sunday dinner became torture, watching Emma rub her growing belly while discussing baby names with the man who was already planning to shatter her world. If you enjoy stories that touch the heart, please subscribe to our channel. We're working toward 1,000 subscribers, and it really helps our work. And comment to let us know what city you're watching from. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon when Emma called me, crying because Michael had missed another doctor's appointment. She was starting to feel like something was wrong, but she couldn't quite name it. The confusion in her voice, the way she kept making excuses for him, it was like listening to my own voice from decades ago. "Laura," she whispered into the phone, "do you think I'm asking too much? Michael says I'm being clingy, but I just thought, with the baby coming, I thought we'd be closer." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my empty bed, staring at the ceiling, remembering what it felt like to be pregnant and alone without even knowing it. I remembered the way my stomach would drop every time my first husband came home late, the way I'd blame myself for his distance, the way I'd convinced myself that I was imagining problems that didn't exist. I thought about my granddaughter or grandson, growing inside Emma's womb, innocent and unaware that their father was already preparing to abandon them before they'd even taken their first breath. I thought about the cycle continuing, another generation damaged by secrets and lies, and the cowardice of people who choose betrayal over honesty. The next morning, I made a decision that would cost me everything I thought I had left. I called Emma and asked her to meet me for coffee. Just the 2 of us. Woman to woman, mother to mother-to-be. I had no idea that simple conversation would lead to my son's hand across my face and 3 weeks of silence that feels like death itself. I had no idea that trying to protect my family would result in them treating me like I was the enemy. But I also had no idea how much strength I still had left, buried beneath years of keeping other people's secrets. Sometimes the people who love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. And sometimes the truth is the only weapon you have left against a world that seems determined to keep you quiet. The coffee shop where I met Emma that fateful morning was the same place where I used to take Michael when he was 7 years old, ordering him hot chocolate while I sipped coffee and listened to him tell me about his dreams of becoming a superhero. He was going to save everyone, he said. Protect the innocent. Fight the bad guys. I wonder when he decided to become one of them instead. Emma arrived 15 minutes late, apologizing profusely as she always did, her hand instinctively resting on her rounded belly. She looked tired, the kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying more than just a baby. She was carrying doubt, confusion, the weight of loving someone who was slowly pulling away. "I'm so glad you called," she said, settling into the booth across from me. "I've been feeling so isolated lately. Michael's been working such long hours, and when he is home, he seems distant." I watched her face as she spoke, seeing myself at 28, making excuses for a man who was already planning his escape. The same hopeful smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The same way of downplaying her own instincts to avoid seeming demanding or unreasonable. "Emma," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "there's something you need to know about Michael." The words came out slowly, carefully. I told her about the phone conversation I'd overheard, about the woman named Jessica, about the hotel receipts and the lies, and the pattern I recognized because I'd lived it myself. I watched the color drain from her face, watched her hand move protectively over her belly, as if she could shield her unborn child from the truth. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, you must have misunderstood. Michael would never. He's excited about the baby. He talks about being a father all the time." But even as she protested, I could see the recognition dawning in her eyes. The pieces were falling into place, all those unexplained absences, the phone calls he took in private, the way he'd been pulling away just when she needed him most. "I'm telling you this because I love you both," I said, reaching across the table to take her trembling hand. "Because I don't want you to spend years wondering if you're crazy, years blaming yourself for problems you didn't create. And because that baby deserves better." Emma pulled her hand away as if I'd burned her. "You're wrong," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Michael isn't like that. He wouldn't do this to us." 2 days later, Michael called me, not to thank me for looking out for his family, not to acknowledge that maybe his mother knew something about recognizing the signs of a man who was checked out of his marriage. No, he called to scream at me for interfering in his life. "How dare you poison Emma against me?" he shouted into the phone, his voice filled with a rage I'd never heard before. "How dare you spread lies about your own son?" "They're not lies, Michael," I said quietly, "and you know it." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, "Stay away from us, Mom. I mean it. Don't call, don't visit, don't contact Emma. You've done enough damage." The line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone in my hand like it was a foreign object. In 67 years of life, through everything I'd endured and overcome, I had never felt so completely rejected by someone I'd given everything to protect. But it was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, the walls Michael built around his family extended to everyone else who mattered to me. My daughter Sarah, who lived 3 states away, started taking longer to return my calls. When she finally did call back, her voice was strained, careful. "Mom, Michael told me what happened," she said. "Maybe you should have minded your own business. Emma's a grown woman. She can handle her own marriage. Sarah, you don't understand. I understand that you accused your son of cheating based on one conversation you might have misheard. That's pretty serious, Mom." Misheard. As if 35 years of marriage and 2 decades of single motherhood hadn't taught me to recognize the sound of a man making excuses for betrayal. As if my own experience meant nothing. As if my wisdom was just paranoid delusion. My youngest, David, was gentler, but equally distant. "Mom, I think you meant well, but sometimes it's better to let people figure things out on their own. Michael's really hurt. Maybe you should apologize." Apologize. For trying to protect a pregnant woman from the same devastation that had nearly destroyed me. For speaking truth instead of maintaining comfortable lies. for being a mother who refused to watch history repeat itself in silence. The isolation wasn't just from my children. Word travels fast in small communities, especially when it involves family drama. At the grocery store, my neighbor Mrs. Henderson, who had known me for 15 years, suddenly found the produce section fascinating when she saw me approaching. The woman who usually waved from her garden when I got my mail now hurried inside whenever my car pulled into the driveway. Even worse were the ones who did talk to me. The sideways glances, the careful questions designed to extract gossip rather than offer support. "How are things with the family, Laura?" they'd ask with false concern, hoping for details they could share over coffee with their own friends. I began to understand how quickly you can become the villain in your own story, how easily people will side with the charming young man over the older woman who dares to speak uncomfortable truths, how the messenger gets blamed when the message disrupts everyone's comfortable assumptions about who deserves protection and who deserves silence. Emma stopped answering my calls completely. The few times I drove past their house, I could see her car in the driveway, but she never responded to my knocks. I left groceries on their doorstep twice, ingredients for the meals I knew she loved, things to help with the nausea that was making it hard for her to eat. Both times, the bags sat untouched until garbage day. Michael changed their locks. I discovered this when I tried to use my spare key during what I thought was an emergency. I'd seen an ambulance on their street and panicked, thinking something had happened to Emma or the baby. Standing on their front porch, frantically trying a key that no longer fit, I realized I'd been officially exiled from the family I'd spent my entire adult life building and protecting. That night, sitting alone in my house with only the television for company, I understood what it meant to be invisible in your own story, to have your motives questioned, your love dismissed, your experience discounted as if it meant nothing, to be painted as the disruptor of peace rather than the guardian of truth. But late that night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Through the thin walls that separated our properties, I could hear Emma crying, deep, heartbroken sobs that carried across the darkness between our houses, the sound of a woman who had discovered that the truth she'd tried so hard to deny was worse than anything she'd imagined. And I knew, with the terrible certainty that comes from lived experience, that everything was about to get much worse before it got better. 3 weeks after hearing Emma's tears through the darkness, I made what would become the biggest mistake of this entire ordeal. I decided to try one more time to reach my son, to make him understand that everything I'd done came from love, not malice. I should have known better. I should have recognized that some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt with good intentions. It was Michael's birthday, his 32nd. For 31 years, I had never missed celebrating this day with him. When he was little, I'd make elaborate themed parties with homemade cakes shaped like dinosaurs or race cars. As he grew older, it became family dinners, carefully planned with his favorite foods and the people who mattered most to him. Even during his college years, when money was tight and I was working 2 jobs, I always found a way to make his birthday special. This year, I wasn't invited. I found out about the party from Sarah, who mentioned it casually during one of our increasingly awkward phone conversations. "Oh, I need to get off early Friday, flying in for Michael's birthday dinner." The words hit me like a physical blow. They were all gathering. Sarah flying in from Portland, David driving up from the city, Emma's parents coming from their retirement community, everyone except the woman who had given birth to him. I spent that Thursday night baking his favorite cake, German chocolate, the same recipe my mother had taught me when Michael was 5 and declared it the best cake in the universe. My hands moved automatically through the familiar motions, creaming butter and sugar, folding in coconut and pecans, spreading the caramel frosting with the same careful technique I'd perfected over decades of birthdays. The cake sat on my kitchen counter that Friday morning, perfectly frosted, candles ready to be placed. I stared at it for an hour, debating whether showing up uninvited would be an act of love or an act of desperation. In the end, love won, or what I thought was love. I arrived at their house at 6:30, cake in hand, wearing the blue dress Michael had always said looked nice on me. Through the front window, I could see the warm glow of the dining room, hear the sounds of laughter and conversation that should have included my voice. For a moment, I stood frozen on the sidewalk, remembering all the times I'd walked up this same path carrying birthday cakes and Christmas presents and Sunday dinners. Emma answered the door, her face going pale when she saw me standing there. She was showing now, really showing, her belly round and prominent under a maternity dress I didn't recognize. She looked healthier than she had weeks ago, but there was something different in her eyes, a hardness that hadn't been there before. "Laura," she said, not opening the screen door. "What are you doing here?" "It's Michael's birthday," I said, holding up the cake like a peace offering. I made his favorite, German chocolate, the recipe he's loved since he was a child." Behind Emma, I could see movement in the hallway. Michael appeared, and the expression on his face when he saw me was something I'll carry to my grave. Not anger this time. That might have been easier to bear. This was disgust. Pure, undiluted disgust. As if I were something unpleasant he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. "I told you to stay away," he said, his voice carrying clearly to where his siblings and in-laws sat around the dining room table. "I told you not to contact us." "Michael, please," I said, my voice breaking despite my efforts to stay strong. "It's your birthday. I'm your mother. I just wanted to—" "You wanted to what? Ruin another family moment? Spread more lies? Make Emma upset again right when she's finally starting to feel better?" The words stung because they contained just enough truth to be devastating. Emma did look better. Whatever had been troubling her weeks ago seemed to have resolved. Maybe I had been wrong. Maybe what I'd heard had been innocent after all. Maybe I really was just a bitter old woman projecting my own painful history onto their happy marriage. "I brought cake," I said weakly, aware of how pathetic I sounded. "We already have cake," Emma said, her voice gentler than Michael's but no less final. "My mother made one. We don't need yours." From inside the house, I could hear David's voice. "Mom, is that Grandma Laura?" My heart lifted for just a moment, thinking maybe one of my children would invite me in, would remember that I belonged here too. "No," Michael called back without taking his eyes off me. "It's nobody. Just someone at the wrong address." Nobody. That single word hit harder than his slap had weeks earlier. Nobody. After 32 years of midnight fevers and scraped knees and homework help and college tuition payments and countless sacrifices that had shaped every decision of my adult life, I had become nobody. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds, holding a cake that suddenly felt impossibly heavy in my arms. Through the window, I could see Sarah's silhouette at the dining room table, her back deliberately turned toward the front door. I could see David shifting uncomfortably, probably wondering what was happening but not curious enough to come see for himself. "Please just go," Emma said, and there was something almost like pity in her voice, which somehow made everything worse. "Please don't make this harder than it has to be." Michael stepped closer to the screen door, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more threatening than shouting would have been. "If you ever show up here uninvited again, I'm calling the police. Do you understand me? I'll file a restraining order. I'll make sure you can't come within 100 yards of my family. My family. Not our family. His family." I had been officially excised from the group of people who mattered to him. I turned and walked back to my car, still carrying the cake, my legs feeling like they might give out at any moment. Behind me, I heard the front door close with finality, heard the sounds of celebration resume as if I'd never been there at all, as if my presence had been nothing more than a brief, unpleasant interruption to their perfect evening. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, staring at the cake on my passenger seat, before I realized I was crying. Not the gentle tears of sadness, but the harsh, ugly sobs of someone whose world has just collapsed completely. Every birthday memory I'd treasured, every moment of pride I'd felt watching my son grow into a man, every sacrifice I'd made to give him the life he deserved, all of it had been reduced to this moment of complete rejection. When I finally drove home, I threw the cake in the garbage without cutting a single slice. But late that night, I found myself digging it out, sitting at my kitchen table eating Michael's favorite cake alone in the dark, tasting 32 years of love that apparently meant nothing at all. The next morning, I woke up to find my front yard decorated with toilet paper and eggs splattered across my windows. Neighborhood kids, Probably friends of teenagers who'd heard gossip about the crazy old woman who'd tried to break up a marriage. The message was clear. Even the children in this community knew I was the villain now. I cleaned it up myself, scrubbing egg off glass while my 70-year-old neighbor Mr. Peterson watched from his porch without offering help. When I waved at him, the same friendly gesture I'd made every morning for 10 years, he looked away and went inside his house. That afternoon, I received a text message from an unknown number. "Stop trying to destroy our family. Some secrets are meant to stay buried. You'll regret this if you don't back off." I stared at that message for hours, wondering who had sent it and what secrets they were referring to. Because if there was one thing I'd learned in 67 years of life, it's that when people tell you to stay quiet, it usually means you're closer to the truth than they want you to be. The anonymous text message haunted me for days. But it was what happened the following Tuesday that nearly broke what was left of my spirit. I was at the grocery store, the same one where I'd shopped for my family for over 2 decades, when I saw Emma in the produce section, her belly now unmistakably prominent at 7 months pregnant. My heart leaped despite everything. She looked healthy, glowing even, carefully selecting apples with the methodical attention that pregnant women give to everything they put in their bodies. For a moment, I forgot about the rejection, the anger, the terrible things that had been said. All I saw was my son's wife, carrying my grandchild, someone I'd loved like my own daughter. I approached slowly, cautiously, like you might approach a wounded animal that could either accept help or bite you. "Emma," I said softly when I was close enough that she couldn't pretend not to see me. She looked up, and for just a second, I saw something flicker across her face. Not quite warmth, but not the cold rejection I'd grown accustomed to either. Something more complicated. Something that looked almost like guilt? "Laura," she said, glancing around as if checking to see who might be watching us. How are you?" "I'm managing," I said, though we both knew it was a lie. I looked terrible and I knew it. I'd lost weight I couldn't afford to lose, and the sleepless nights had carved shadows under my eyes that makeup couldn't hide. "How are you feeling? How's the baby?" For a moment, her hand moved instinctively to her belly and she almost smiled. "Growing strong. Active. The doctor says everything looks perfect." "I'm so glad," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. "Emma, I know things are complicated between us, but I want you to know that I love you, both of you, and if you ever need anything, Laura, don't." Her voice was quiet but firm. "Please don't make this harder than it already is." "Harder than what already is?" I asked, confused by the pain in her voice. She looked away, focusing intently on the apples in her hands. "Michael says you've been calling the house, driving by, that you threw rocks at our windows last week." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "Emma, no. I haven't called since his birthday. I haven't driven by your house. And I would never throw anything at your windows. Why would you think I'd do something like that?" But even as I protested, I could see doubt creeping into her expression. "Michael showed me the security footage from our neighbor's camera. He said it was you." "It wasn't me," I said, my voice rising slightly before I caught myself and lowered it again. "Emma, I swear to you, it wasn't me. I haven't been anywhere near your house since that night. I wouldn't lie to you about this." She studied my face for a long moment, and I could see her wavering. But then another voice cut through our conversation like a knife. "Emma, what are you doing here?" Michael appeared at the end of the produce aisle, and the transformation in Emma's demeanor was immediate and heartbreaking. Her shoulders tensed, her face went pale, and she stepped away from me as if I were radioactive. "I was just shopping," she said quickly. She was just leaving." Michael's eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Mom, what did I tell you about staying away from us?" "Michael, I wasn't bothering her. We just happened to run into each other. I was being polite." "Polite?" His voice was getting louder, drawing stares from other shoppers. "Is that what you call harassing my pregnant wife? Following us around town? Vandalizing our property?" "I never vandalized anything," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. "Michael, you know me. You know I would never—" "I don't know you anymore," he said, and the disgust in his voice was unmistakable. The mother I thought I knew wouldn't have tried to destroy my marriage based on lies. The mother I thought I knew wouldn't have upset my pregnant wife. The mother I thought I knew wouldn't be stalking us. "I'm not stalking you," I whispered, aware that we were drawing a crowd. Other shoppers had stopped pretending to examine produce and were openly watching our family drama unfold in aisle 3. "Then explain the security footage," Michael said. "Explain why someone who looks exactly like you was throwing rocks at our house at 2 in the morning last Tuesday?" I stared at him, genuinely bewildered. "Michael, I was home Tuesday night. I was watching old movies and fell asleep on the couch. I haven't been near your house since your birthday, I swear." But I could see he didn't believe me. Worse, I could see Emma didn't believe me either. They had security footage. They had evidence. And here I was, the woman who'd already been branded a liar and troublemaker, asking them to believe my word over video proof. "Stay away from us," Michael said, his voice carrying clearly across the produce section. "Stay away from my wife. Stay away from my house. Stay away from my family. If I see you near Emma again, I'm calling the police." He took Emma's arm and guided her away, leaving me standing alone among the apples and oranges while strangers stared and whispered. I heard fragments of their conversations as I stood there, frozen with humiliation. Never seen anything like it. Harassing her own son. Poor pregnant girl. Some people just can't let go. I abandoned my shopping cart and walked out of the store, my cheeks burning with shame. In the parking lot, I sat in my car and tried to make sense of what had just happened. Someone who looked like me had thrown rocks at their house? Someone was impersonating me? Making me look even worse than I already did? Or was I losing my mind? Had the stress and isolation finally driven me to do things I couldn't remember? Was I becoming the unstable old woman they all seemed to think I was? That night, I sat at my kitchen table with photo albums spread around me like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't solve. Pictures of Michael's first steps, his graduation, his wedding day. Pictures of family Christmases and birthday parties and Sunday dinners when we were all happy and whole. Pictures of Emma at her baby shower, glowing with joy. Her hand in mine as we laughed about something I couldn't remember. When had it all gone so wrong? When had I become the villain in these people's lives instead of the woman who'd sacrificed everything to protect them? I found myself staring at one particular photo. Michael at age 8, his arms wrapped around my neck after I'd surprised him by picking him up early from school to take him for ice cream. The pure love in his eyes, the absolute trust that his mother would always be there for him, would always choose his happiness over her own comfort. That little boy was gone. The man who'd looked at me today in the grocery store was a stranger wearing my son's face, capable of cruelties that child never could have imagined. I closed the photo albums and walked to my bedroom, where I kept the one thing I'd never shown anyone, the one piece of evidence that could explain everything, justify everything, maybe even save what was left of my relationship with my children. But using it would destroy other people. Innocent people who'd already suffered enough. People who trusted me to keep their secrets the same way I'd kept my own for so many years. I pulled the manila envelope from my dresser drawer and held it in my hands, feeling the weight of 35 years of silence. Inside were documents, photographs, bank statements. Proof of things that would change how my children saw their father, their childhood, their entire understanding of who they really were. I'd been protecting them from this truth their whole lives. But maybe protection had been a mistake. Maybe the lies I'd told to spare their feelings had only created space for new lies to flourish. I set the envelope on my nightstand and stared at it until dawn, knowing that once I opened it, there would be no going back. Everyone would finally understand why I'd recognized the signs of Michael's betrayal so quickly, why I'd been so desperate to warn Emma. But they'd also learn that the father they'd loved and mourned for 15 years had been a stranger too. They'd learn that their childhood memories were built on foundations of deception and betrayal. They'd learn that I'd been keeping secrets that made Michael's affair look like a minor indiscretion. As the sun rose outside my bedroom window, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. I wasn't going to protect people who'd shown me nothing but cruelty. I wasn't going to carry other people's secrets while they destroyed my reputation and my relationships. But I still had something they'd forgotten about. Something that would make them understand that their mother wasn't crazy or vindictive or unstable. Something that would prove I'd been telling the truth all along. For 3 days, I carried that manila envelope with me everywhere. To the post office, to the pharmacy, even to the small diner where I'd started eating breakfast alone because cooking for one person felt too much like admitting defeat. The envelope sat beside my coffee cup like a loaded weapon, heavy with possibilities I wasn't sure I was brave enough to unleash. It was Thursday morning when I finally understood I wasn't going crazy. I was sitting by my front window drinking coffee and watching the neighborhood wake up when I saw her. A woman about my age, with the same silver gray hair, the same general build, wearing a coat that looked remarkably similar to one I owned. She was walking past my house, moving with purpose. But something about her gait seemed wrong, too deliberate, too performative. I grabbed my binoculars, the ones I used for bird watching, and focused on her retreating figure. When she turned at the corner, I caught a glimpse of her profile, and my blood ran cold. It wasn't me, but it could have been from a distance. Someone had been very carefully studying my appearance, my mannerisms, my clothing choices. Someone wanted my family to think I was losing my mind. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I got in my car and drove purposefully through town, but not to spy on my family. Instead, I went to the library and spent 3 hours researching public records, property deeds, and archived newspaper articles. Information that had been public for decades, but that I'd never thought to connect before. The pieces that emerged painted a picture I should have seen years ago. Jessica, the woman Michael was allegedly having an affair with, wasn't just a co-worker. She was the daughter of Richard Hartley, the man who'd bought our family's construction business after my first husband died. The same business that had mysteriously failed just 6 months after the sale, leaving dozens of employees without pensions they'd been promised. More interesting still, Jessica had been engaged 3 years ago to a man named Thomas Morrison, no relation to us despite the name, who died in a car accident that made front-page news because of the unusual circumstances. His car had gone off the road on a perfectly clear night, on a stretch of highway he'd driven hundreds of times before. I sat in the library parking lot as the sun set, staring at photocopied newspaper articles and trying to understand what I was seeing. Patterns of convenient accidents and business failures. Patterns of young women who married men with money and property, only to become widows under circumstances that raised questions, but never quite demanded investigations. My phone rang, startling me out of my research trance. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer. Mrs. Morrison? The voice was young, female, nervous. This is going to sound crazy, but I think we need to talk. About your son Michael. About Jessica Hartley. About things that happened a long time ago. Who is this? I asked, though my heart was already racing with anticipation. My name is Carol Peterson. I work at the insurance company. I've been handling some claims that, well, they don't make sense unless someone's been very good at making accidents look natural. We agreed to meet the next morning at a coffee shop 3 towns over, somewhere neither of us was likely to be recognized. Carol turned out to be a petite woman in her 40s, with sharp eyes and the kind of carefully controlled demeanor that suggested she'd seen too much and trusted too little. I've been an insurance investigator for 12 years, she said without preamble, sliding a thick folder across the table. I specialize in questionable claims, particularly life insurance policies that pay out under suspicious circumstances. Your ex-husband's death 15 years ago flagged in our system when I was cross-referencing some recent cases. I opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were documents I'd never seen before, insurance papers, medical reports, photographs of the construction site where my first husband had supposedly fallen to his death. But these weren't the sanitized reports I'd been given at the time. These showed details that raised disturbing questions about how an experienced construction worker had managed to fall from a scaffold he'd inspected personally that morning. There were traces of a sedative in his blood, Carol continued, watching my face carefully. Not enough to kill him, but enough to affect his balance, his reaction time. The coroner ruled it accidental because the amount was so small it could have been explained by prescription medication. But your husband wasn't taking any prescription medication. I stared at the toxicology report, remembering that last morning. David had been unusually tired, complaining of feeling foggy and off balance. I'd suggested he stay home from work, but he'd insisted he had an important meeting with potential investors. Investors who, it turned out, had never existed. "There's more," Carol said gently. "Jessica Hartley's previous fiancé, Thomas Morrison, same pattern. Traces of sedatives, accidental death, life insurance payout that went to his grieving fiancé. And there are 3 other cases in surrounding counties over the past 7 years. All men who died in accidents after marrying or becoming engaged to women connected to the Hartley family business interests." The coffee in my cup had gone cold, but I couldn't have swallowed it anyway. My throat felt like someone had filled it with sand. Are you telling me that Jessica killed my husband? I'm saying there's a pattern that deserves investigation, and I'm saying your son might be in danger." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with Carol's folder spread in front of me, alongside the manila envelope I'd been carrying for days. 2 different mysteries that were starting to look like the same story told from different angles. Inside my envelope were the documents I'd discovered 15 years ago but had never shown anyone. Bank statements showing large cash deposits to my husband's account from unknown sources, photographs of him with a woman who wasn't me, and most damning of all, a letter in his handwriting outlining his plan to fake his own death and disappear with his mistress once the insurance money came through. Except someone had made sure his fake death became real. I'd spent 15 years protecting my children from the knowledge that their father was a cheater and a fraud who'd planned to abandon them. I'd let them grieve him as a hero who'd died providing for his family, rather than a coward who'd been planning to steal their future. But now I understood that the woman in those photographs, the woman my husband had planned to run away with, had been Jessica Hartley's mother. And the pattern of seduction, insurance fraud, and convenient accidents had been repeating itself for decades. My phone buzzed with a text message from the same unknown number that had threatened me weeks earlier. "Stop digging or you'll end up like your husband. Some accidents run in families." But this time, instead of fear, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Clarity. Not grief, not confusion, not the desperate need to be understood and forgiven. This was something sharper, cleaner. This was purpose. I walked to my bedroom and pulled out a small digital camera I'd bought years ago but barely used. Then I sat down at my computer, the same computer where I'd learned to send emails and look up recipes, and started typing. Not a letter to my children, not a plea for forgiveness, not an explanation of my actions. I was writing a detailed account of everything I'd discovered, everything I'd observed, everything I suspected. Names, dates, financial records, patterns of behavior that went back decades. I was creating a record that would protect Michael even if I couldn't, because I'd finally understood what I was really fighting. This wasn't about a marriage falling apart or a son who'd lost faith in his mother. This was about predators who'd been operating in plain sight for years, destroying families and killing inconvenient men while everyone blamed the victims for their own misfortune. As I typed, I could feel something shifting inside me. The defeated woman who'd stood in a grocery store being humiliated by her own son was gone. The desperate mother who'd thrown a cake away in heartbreak was gone. What remained was someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous than anyone in my family had ever imagined. Someone who'd spent 35 years learning how to be invisible, how to observe, how to gather information while everyone assumed she was just a harmless old woman who didn't understand the complexities of modern life. They were about to discover exactly how much this harmless old woman really understood, and exactly how far a mother would go to protect her child, even when that child no longer wanted her protection. I spent the next week moving like a ghost through my own life, but now it was intentional. Where before I'd felt invisible because I'd been pushed to the margins, now I made myself invisible because invisibility was power. People don't watch what they can't see, and they certainly don't suspect what they refuse to acknowledge. Every morning, I drove to different locations around town. The park where young mothers brought their children, the coffee shop where business people held their meetings, the bank where Jessica Hartley worked. I wasn't stalking or harassing anyone. I was studying, learning patterns, understanding routines, becoming the kind of observer my family had never imagined I could be. Jessica was beautiful in that polished, professional way that men Michael's age found irresistible. 31 years old, according to the employee directory I'd found online, with honey blonde hair and the kind of confident smile that suggested she'd never doubted her ability to get what she wanted. She drove a luxury car that was well beyond what her bank salary should have afforded, wore designer clothes that spoke of resources that didn't appear on any public financial records. More telling were her lunch companions. 3 times that week, I watched her meet with older men in expensive suits who handed her envelopes across restaurant tables. Business transactions that looked casual but felt orchestrated, money changing hands in ways that left no paper trail. I started carrying a small notebook, writing down license plate numbers, noting times and locations, documenting a pattern of behavior that painted a picture no one else was looking for. Because who would suspect a respected bank employee of being part of something sinister? Who would imagine that a young woman planning to marry a successful contractor was anything other than lucky in love? But I'd learned to recognize predators. They wore many faces, but they all had the same eyes, calculating, patient, always watching for weakness they could exploit. On Wednesday afternoon, I made a decision that would have terrified the woman I'd been a month ago. I drove to Michael's office, not to confront him or beg for forgiveness, but to observe him in his natural environment, to see how he interacted with Jessica when they thought no one who mattered was watching. His construction company occupied a small building on the industrial side of town, surrounded by equipment yards and machinery that represented the empire he'd built from nothing. I'd been so proud when he'd started this business, had contributed my own small savings to help him buy his first truck. Now I sat in my car across the street, wondering if I was watching history repeat itself in the most terrible way possible. Jessica's car was already in the parking lot when Michael arrived at 1 o'clock. Through the office windows, I could see them talking animatedly, their body language suggesting an intimacy that went far beyond professional collaboration. But as I watched longer, something else emerged, something that made my blood run cold. Michael wasn't the confident seducer I'd imagined. He looked tired, stressed, even frightened. When Jessica placed her hand on his arm, he didn't lean into the touch. He tensed, as if her affection carried some kind of threat. When she laughed at something he said, his smile didn't reach his eyes. This wasn't a man enjoying an affair. This was a man trapped by something he didn't fully understand. I stayed in that parking lot for 3 hours, taking pictures with the telephoto lens Carol had loaned me, documenting interactions that told a story very different from the one I'd been assuming. When Jessica finally left, Michael sat alone at his desk for another hour, his head in his hands, looking like a man trying to solve a problem that had no good solutions. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since his birthday disaster. I called Michael's office number, knowing he often worked late, and hoping to catch him when Jessica wasn't around to influence what he said. Morrison Construction. His voice sounded exhausted. Michael, it's your mother. Please don't hang up. There was a long pause, and I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. When he finally spoke, his voice was different than it had been in weeks. Less angry, more frightened. Mom, I can't talk to you. You know I can't. Michael, I know about Jessica. I know about her family. I know about the pattern of accidents and insurance payouts. And I know you're in danger. Another pause. Longer this time. What are you talking about? Your father's death wasn't an accident, Michael. Jessica's mother was involved with your father before he died. And now Jessica is with you. The same pattern 35 years later. Mom, you're scaring me. You're talking like... His voice trailed off. Like what? Like a crazy old woman? Michael, I need you to listen to me. Really listen. Has Jessica asked you to increase your life insurance recently? Has she suggested any changes to your will? Has she been cooking for you, bringing you drinks? Anything that might explain why you've been feeling tired or off balance lately? The silence that followed lasted so long I thought he'd hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. How did you know about the insurance? My heart broke and raced simultaneously. Because it's what they do, Michael. It's what Jessica's family has been doing for decades. They find successful men, make them fall in love, then arrange accidents that look natural but aren't. Mom, this is insane. You're talking about murder. Yes, I am. And if you don't get away from Jessica Hartley, you're going to be their next victim. I heard movement on his end of the line, footsteps, a door closing. When he spoke again, his voice was muffled, as if he was hiding in a closet or bathroom. She has keys to everything, he said suddenly. My office, my house, my truck. She said she wanted to help with business paperwork, but she's been going through my files when I'm not here. And the insurance thing. She said we should increase the policy because of the baby coming. Made it seem romantic, like she was thinking about our future. Michael, where is she now? With Emma. She offered to take Emma shopping for baby things, said they should bond as sisters. They've been gone for hours. Terror shot through my veins like ice water. Call Emma, right now. Tell her to get away from Jessica immediately. Mom, I can't just... Michael, call your wife right now and tell her to get to a public place with lots of people. Don't explain why, just get her away from Jessica. I heard him dialing, heard the phone ring and ring before going to voicemail. She's not answering, he said, and I could hear the panic starting to build in his voice. Try again. Keep trying. And Michael, meet me at the police station on 5th Street. Bring any paperwork Jessica has been handling, any documents she's asked you to sign, anything she's touched. We're going to end this tonight. But Mom, what if you're wrong? What if Jessica really does love me and you're just... Then I'll look like a fool and you can have me committed to a mental health facility. But if I'm right, Michael, if I'm right, then Emma and your baby are in danger right now. After I hung up, I sat in my car for a moment, staring at my phone and praying I wasn't too late. Then I started the engine and drove toward the police station, calling Carol Peterson on the way. Carol, it's Laura. I think Jessica is making her move tonight. Michael can't reach Emma, and Jessica has been with her for hours. I'm already ahead of you, Carol said, her voice tight with tension. I've been monitoring Jessica's credit cards. She used one 20 minutes ago to buy a large quantity of over-the-counter sleep aids from a pharmacy across town. Way more than anyone would need for personal use. Where? Miller's Pharmacy on Elm Street. But Laura, I also just got a call from a hospital in the next county. A young pregnant woman was brought in unconscious after a car accident. The car went off the road for no apparent reason. The woman is alive, but barely. My world tilted sideways. Emma? I don't know yet. But Laura? The car was registered to Jessica Hartley. I pressed the accelerator to the floor, racing toward a confrontation I should have initiated weeks ago. In the distance, I could see Michael's truck pulling into the police station parking lot, and I knew that whatever happened next would determine whether I saved my family or lost them forever. But for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of the outcome. I was ready for whatever came next. The police station lobby felt like a battlefield where all the lies of the past months would finally meet the truth I'd been carrying alone. Michael was already there when I arrived, pacing back and forth with a manila folder clutched in his hands, his face pale with a mixture of fear and dawning realization. When he saw me walk through the glass doors, something broke in his expression. Not anger this time, but a desperate relief that someone else finally understood the danger he'd been too blind to see. Mom, he said, and it was the first time in weeks that word had sounded like love instead of accusation. Emma's phone is still going straight to voicemail. I've been calling for 40 minutes. Detective Sarah Chen listened to our story with the kind of professional skepticism that made me grateful Carol Peterson was already on her way with documentation. Michael spread his papers across her desk. Insurance documents, business contracts, financial forms that Jessica had been helping him organize. She's been very interested in my assets, Michael said, his voice hollow with understanding. The house, the business, my retirement accounts. She said it was because she wanted to make sure Emma and the baby were protected if something happened to me. Detective Chen picked up one of the documents, studying Jessica's handwriting in the margins. And you said your mother has concerns about Ms. Hartley's family history? Before I could answer, Carol Peterson burst through the station doors carrying 2 large boxes of files and a laptop computer. Detective Chen, I'm Carol Peterson, insurance investigator. I believe we spoke on the phone about the Hartley case. What followed was the most vindicating and terrifying hour of my life. Carol spread her evidence across 3 desks: financial records, death certificates, insurance payouts, and most damning of all, a pattern that connected 7 suspicious deaths over 15 years. All men who'd been involved with women connected to the Hartley family. All deaths ruled accidental. All resulting in substantial insurance payouts that somehow found their way into offshore accounts controlled by Richard Hartley. Your father's death, Carol said to Michael, pointing to a thick file, showed traces of diazepam in his bloodstream. Just enough to affect his balance and coordination. Not enough to cause obvious impairment. The same drug cocktail has shown up in 4 other cases. Michael stared at the toxicology report, and I watched 35 years of beliefs crumble in his mind. But he fell from a scaffold. It was a construction accident. A scaffold that had been tampered with, Carol continued. Bolts loosened just enough to give way under stress. Your father was drugged, disoriented, and then placed in a situation designed to look like workplace negligence. Detective Chen was already on her radio, dispatching units to search for Jessica's car and putting out a bolo for Emma. But I could see in her expression that we all shared the same terrible fear. If Jessica had followed her family's pattern, Emma might already be beyond help. There's something else, Carol said, her voice gentle but urgent. We traced Jessica's movements over the past 6 months. She's been systematically learning Emma's routines, befriending her, gaining her trust. Emma's credit cards show regular lunch dates, shopping trips, spa visits. Jessica has been studying her target for months. Michael's phone rang, and we all froze as he looked at the caller ID. It's Jessica, he whispered. Answer it, Detective Chen said, motioning for her colleagues to start tracing the call. Act normal. Don't let her know we're onto her. Michael's hand was shaking as he pressed the answer button. Jessica? Where are you? I've been trying to reach Emma. Oh, Michael, thank God. Jessica's voice carried clearly through the phone, sweet and concerned and absolutely convincing. Emma started feeling dizzy while we were shopping. I think it might be pregnancy-related, but I got scared and decided to take her to the hospital. We're at St. Mary's now. Is she okay? Can I talk to her? She's resting. The doctor said she just needs fluids and monitoring. Why don't you meet us here? Bring her overnight bag, just in case they want to keep her for observation. Detective Chen was already signaling to her officers, but I grabbed Michael's arm before he could agree to Jessica's request. Ask her which room, I whispered. Ask her to put Emma on the phone. Which room are you in? Michael asked. And can I just say hello to Emma? I know she'll want to hear my voice. There was a pause, just long enough to confirm what we all suspected. She's in with the doctor right now, room 314. Just come quickly, okay? I'm so worried about her. Detective Chen was already coordinating with the hospital, and within minutes we had confirmation that Emma Morrison was not a patient at St. Mary's Hospital. More importantly, the security cameras in the shopping center parking lot had captured footage of Emma collapsing beside Jessica's car at 3:47 p.m. Jessica had been seen carrying Emma's unconscious body into her vehicle. She has her, Michael said, and the devastation in his voice reminded me of the scared little boy who used to run to my room during thunderstorms. She has my wife and my baby. But Carol was studying her laptop screen with growing excitement. Michael, does Jessica know about the GPS tracker in your construction trucks? What? No, why would... Wait. Michael's eyes widened. She borrowed my truck last week. Said her car was in the shop and she needed to pick up something heavy for the office. Carol's fingers flew across her keyboard. She installed a tracker, but that means... She looked up with the first genuine smile I'd seen from anyone in weeks. It means we can find her. The next 20 minutes felt like the longest of my life. We watched the GPS signal on Carol's screen, following Jessica's route through back roads to an abandoned warehouse complex 20 miles outside town. Detective Chen coordinated with emergency response teams while Michael called Emma's parents, and I tried to process the magnitude of what was happening. Mom, Michael said suddenly, reaching for my hand. I'm so sorry. Everything you tried to tell me. Everything you tried to warn us about. I should have listened. I should have trusted you. I squeezed his fingers, feeling the calluses from years of construction work. Remembering when those hands had been small enough to fit completely in mine. You were protecting your family the only way you knew how. That's what good men do. But you were protecting us too, and I made you the enemy instead of listening to what you were trying to say. Michael, we can talk about forgiveness later. Right now, We need to focus on getting Emma and the baby home safely. Detective Chen approached us, her radio crackling with updates from the field teams. We've surrounded the warehouse complex. Thermal imaging shows 2 people inside. One moving, one stationary. We're going in. What followed was the longest hour of my life. Michael and I sat in that police station, holding hands like we hadn't done since he was a child, waiting for news that would determine whether our family would survive this nightmare intact. When Detective Chen's radio finally crackled with the words, "Suspects in custody, victim conscious and responsive," Michael broke down completely. Not the angry tears of a man who'd been betrayed, but the relieved sobs of a father who'd almost lost everything. Emma was rushed to the hospital, dehydrated and drugged but alive. The baby's heartbeat was strong. Jessica Hartley was arrested along with 2 accomplices who'd been preparing what investigators later determined would have been staged as a tragic car accident involving a pregnant woman who'd driven off a remote road in the dark. As we drove to the hospital, Michael was quiet for a long time before finally speaking. "Mom, how did you know? How did you see what I couldn't see?" I thought about all the ways I could answer that question. I could talk about experience, about recognizing patterns, about the wisdom that comes from surviving betrayal. But in the end, the truth was simpler than that. "Because I'm your mother," I said. "And sometimes that's the only qualification you need to see danger coming and fight like hell to protect the people you love." That night, sitting in Emma's hospital room while she slept safely and the baby kicked strongly against her belly, I finally understood that some fights are worth everything they cost. Some truths are worth telling even when no one wants to hear them. And sometimes being right is less important than being brave enough to stand alone until the world catches up to what you've known all along. 3 months later, I was standing in the same hospital where this nightmare had almost ended in tragedy. But this time I was holding my granddaughter. Emma had insisted on naming her Grace. "Because," she said, looking at me with tears in her eyes, "your Grace saved all of our lives." The baby was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and the most beautiful dark eyes that seemed to look right through you to your soul. As I held her, I couldn't help but think about how close we'd come to losing her before she'd even had a chance to breathe her first breath. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of court proceedings, family therapy, and the slow, careful work of rebuilding trust that had been shattered by lies and misunderstanding. Jessica Hartley and her accomplices were facing multiple charges of attempted murder, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. The investigation had uncovered a network of crimes spanning 2 decades, with victims in 4 states. But more than the legal justice, what mattered to me was the healing that had happened within our own family. Michael had moved back home with Emma for the final month of her pregnancy, unable to bear the thought of being anywhere that Jessica might have contaminated with her presence. He'd spent weeks going through their house with a detective, identifying everything Jessica had touched, every document she'd seen, every plan she'd been making for his destruction. She had it all mapped out, he told me one afternoon as we sat in Emma's hospital room waiting for labor to progress, down to the minute details of how the accident would happen, where my truck would be found, what story she'd tell about trying to save me. She even had funeral arrangements planned. The depth of Jessica's manipulation had been staggering. She'd been drugging Michael for months with small doses of sedatives that made him tired, confused, and more susceptible to her influence. She'd isolated him from his family by convincing him that I was becoming unstable and jealous of their happiness. She'd even hired the woman who'd been impersonating me around town, making my family believe I was harassing them when I was simply trying to protect them. "Mom," Michael said that day, his voice still heavy with guilt, "I don't know how to apologize for what I put you through, for the things I said, the way I treated you, for not believing you when you were the only person who could see the truth." I reached over and took his hand. These strong fingers that had learned to build beautiful things from raw materials, just like the man he'd become despite everything that had tried to destroy him. "Michael, you don't apologize for being manipulated by a professional predator. You don't apologize for trying to protect your wife and child the best way you knew how. You apologize for mistakes, not for being human." Emma had been the most generous in her forgiveness, though she'd also been the most traumatized by the experience. The doctors said that another hour in Jessica's custody would have resulted in permanent damage to both her and the baby. The sedatives Jessica had used were specifically chosen to cause what would appear to be natural complications in pregnancy, a miscarriage that could be blamed on stress or genetic factors. "Laura," Emma said to me one evening as we prepared the nursery together, hanging the mobile that had been meant for Michael 32 years ago, "I owe you an apology that's bigger than anything I know how to express. You tried to warn me, and I chose to believe I knew better. I chose to trust someone who was planning to kill my baby rather than trust the woman who'd already proven she'd die to protect this family. Emma, you trusted your husband. That's what wives are supposed to do. Jessica was very good at what she did. She'd been practicing for years." But Emma shook her head, her hands resting protectively on her belly. "No, it was more than that. I wanted to believe that you were wrong because it was easier than facing the possibility that my life wasn't as perfect as I wanted it to be. I wanted to believe that you were just a bitter old woman, rather than acknowledge that you had wisdom I needed." The conversation that followed was one of the most healing of my entire life. Emma told me about growing up with a mother who'd never warned her about anything, who'd sent her into the world believing that love and good intentions were enough to protect you from people with bad intentions. She told me about feeling lost when she'd moved to our town, about how desperately she'd wanted a mother figure, but had been too proud to admit she needed guidance. "I think part of me resented you because you saw danger that I couldn't see, and that made me feel stupid and naive," she admitted. "It was easier to be angry at you than to admit that I didn't know how to protect myself or my baby." Now, holding little Grace in my arms while Emma slept peacefully and Michael dozed in the chair beside her bed, I reflected on the lessons this terrible experience had taught all of us. Not just about recognizing predators or trusting our instincts, but about the difference between protecting people and controlling them, between speaking truth and keeping peace. Detective Chen stopped by that evening to give us the final update on Jessica's case. The evidence Carol Peterson had gathered, combined with what we'd uncovered, had been enough to connect Jessica to her family's entire criminal enterprise. Richard Hartley had been arrested at his home in Florida, where investigators found detailed files on dozens of potential victims dating back 20 years. "Your father's case has been officially reclassified as a homicide," Detective Chen told Michael. "Jessica's mother, Diana Hartley, died 5 years ago, but we found her journals detailing exactly how your father's death was planned and executed. You may never get criminal justice for him since the main perpetrators are dead. But you have the truth now. The truth. It was a strange gift after 35 years of protecting my children from painful realities. But I'd learned that truth, even when it hurts, is always better than the lies people tell themselves to avoid discomfort." A week after Grace was born, Michael and Emma threw a small celebration at their house. Not a party exactly, but a gathering of the people who mattered most. Sarah flew in from Portland with her family. David drove up from the city with his partner. Emma's parents came, along with Carol Peterson, Detective Chen, and even Mrs. Henderson from next door, who'd spent weeks bringing casseroles and apology notes after learning what had really been happening. As I sat at their dining room table, the same table where I'd been banned from birthday celebrations just months earlier, I was struck by how different everything felt. Not just because the danger was over, but because we'd all learned something about the difference between conditional and unconditional love. "I want to say something," Michael announced, standing up with a glass of sparkling cider. 3 months ago, I thought I knew who the good people and bad people in my life were. I thought I knew who deserved my trust and who deserved my suspicion. I was wrong about almost everything." He looked directly at me, his eyes bright with tears that had nothing to do with sadness. "Mom, you spent months trying to save my life while I treated you like an enemy. You suffered through accusations and isolation and rejection, and you never stopped fighting for our family. I will never, ever forget that for the rest of my life." Emma stood up beside him, still moving carefully after the delivery, but radiant with joy and relief. "Laura, I want Grace to grow up knowing that her grandmother is the strongest, bravest, most persistent woman I've ever met. I want her to know that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is tell someone a truth they don't want to hear." As the evening wound down and our family gradually dispersed to their respective homes, I found myself alone with Michael in his kitchen, washing dishes while Emma fed the baby upstairs. "Mom," he said quietly, "I keep thinking about all the years Dad was gone, and how you never once said anything bad about him. Even after you found out he was planning to leave us, you let us believe he was a hero who died providing for his family." I dried a plate slowly, thinking about how to answer. "Michael, children need to be able to love their parents, even when those parents are flawed. Your father made terrible choices, but he also gave me 3 beautiful children who became incredible adults. I wanted you to know the best parts of him, not just the worst. But keeping secrets nearly got me killed." "No," I said firmly. "Keeping secrets from children to protect their innocence is different from keeping secrets from adults to enable their destruction. Jessica's family used secrets as weapons. I used them as shields. The intention matters." Michael was quiet for a long moment, then said, "I want to be the kind of father who protects Grace without lying to her. The kind of man who listens when people who love him try to warn him about danger." "You already are that man," I told him. "You learned from your mistakes. That's what good people do." Later that night, driving home to my house that no longer felt empty, I thought about how differently this story could have ended if I'd stayed quiet to preserve peace. If I'd chosen my own comfort over my family's safety. If I'd let the fear of being wrong silence the voice that knew, absolutely knew, that something terrible was about to happen. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed a package on my doorstep. Inside was a photo album that Emma had put together. Pictures of Grace's first week of life, images of our family reunited and whole, and on the last page, a photo of me holding the baby with a note in Emma's handwriting. "To the woman who taught us that love sometimes looks like disruption, and courage sometimes looks like stubbornness. Thank you for never giving up on us, even when we gave up on you." I sat in my living room that night, looking through those pictures and thinking about the woman I'd been 3 months ago. Broken, rejected, doubting her own sanity. Then I thought about the woman I'd become, someone who'd learned that being right isn't always comfortable, but it's always necessary when lives hang in the balance. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your family is refusing to let them make the same mistakes that once destroyed you. Sometimes love looks like standing alone in the truth, until everyone else finds the courage to join you there. I learned that at 67 years old, it's never too late to discover exactly how strong you really are, and that the voice that whispers warnings in the darkness, the voice that people dismiss as paranoia or bitterness or meddling, is sometimes the only thing standing between the people you love and complete destruction. Grace slept peacefully in her crib that night, protected by 3 generations of women who'd learned that truth, however painful, is always preferable to lies, however comfortable. And I slept peacefully too, knowing that I'd finally taught my family the most important lesson I'd ever learned, that silence in the face of danger isn't peace, it's surrender.